The Bosnian Uprising of 1831. In 1774, after a 6-year war, the Russian Empire defeated the Ottoman Empire. In the peace negotiations, the Ottomans granted Russia the right to protect Orthodox Christians in their territory. As we'll see, Russia took advantage of this concession at every opportunity. Over the next century, the Austrian and Russian empires won several more victories against the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was falling militarily and economically behind the other major powers of the day. If the Ottoman Empire hoped to reverse this trend, they had to make changes. The Ottoman government wanted to move away from its outdated feudal system and become more industrialized. But the Muslim elites living in Bosnia were reluctant to give up their way of life. In 1829, the Ottoman Empire lost the Greek War for Independence. Many European powers, including Russia, supported the Greeks during this conflict. Furious about the defeat and the loss of territory, Sultan Mahmud II introduced various measures to reform Bosnia's feudal and military systems. These reforms sparked a revolt, leading to the Bosnian Uprising in 1831. During this uprising, Bosnian Muslim landowners allied with a group of Albanians to oppose the government. Initially, the rebels did pretty well, capturing the city of Travnik about 55 miles west of Sarajevo. Encouraged by this early success, the rebels demanded Bosnian autonomy, though they'd continued to pledge allegiance to the Ottoman Sultan. But things soon went downhill for the rebels. Internal discord turned the landowners against each other, which the government exploited. Ottoman forces finally suppressed the rebellion in 1832 and implemented many of the Sultan's reforms. The results were mixed. The Ottoman Empire was never able to fully enforce its reforms in Bosnia. The Muslim Bosnian elite dominated Bosnia, and these reforms threatened their way of life. They ignored most of the government's reforms and enacted their own agricultural policies. It is important to note that the Bosniaks did not emphasize a separate national identity like many Arabs and Turks, nor did they advocate for complete independence. Despite the uprising in 1831, the Bosniaks were loyal to and entrenched in the Ottoman Empire. However, they resented the empire's excessive taxes and government reforms. Bosniaks had a long and strong connection to the Ottoman Sultan and the Ottoman Empire, connected through history, religion, and mutual benefits. Bosnian Muslims lived a privileged life under Ottoman authority, and regardless of their wealth or class, they wanted to maintain that privilege. A brief note on the word Bosniak. Muslim Bosnians have called themselves Bosniaci or Bosniak for centuries. This term differentiated them from non-Muslim Bosnians and non-Bosnian Muslims living in Bosnia. During the communist era of the 1960s, the term Bosniak fell out of use, only to be revived again in the 1990s. Today, it is enough to understand that Bosniak is the preferred term for Muslim Bosnians. Slavic Nationalism. Throughout the 1800s, the Ottomans lost wars against the Russians and other Christian European powers. When the Ottomans lost wars, they also lost land. The European powers also forced the Ottomans to enact reforms which benefited the Europeans more than the Ottomans. The Ottoman Empire's weakness sparked nationalistic hopes in the southern Slavic people. Many southern Slavs living in the Austrian Empire wanted to unite with southern Slavs living in the Ottoman Empire to create a new southern Slavic state. Other Slavic nationalists, primarily the Serbs and Croats, wanted to create independent nations that united their people in Austria with their people in Bosnia and Serbia. This idea of Southern Slav unity was known as the Illyrian movement. The Illyrian movement hoped to ignore the religious and cultural differences within the southern Slavs and focus on gaining independence from Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire. Some members of the Illyrian movement even hoped to unite with the Muslim Bosnians and, quote-unquote, free them from Ottoman domination. In the mid-1800s, the Illyrian movement became Yugoslavism. Yugo means south, so one may think of this as South Slavism. The leaders of Yugoslavism pushed for a Yugoslav state that included both Serbs and Croats. However, most Serbs preferred independence from the Ottomans and unification with Serbia. The 1878 Congress of Berlin. The Austrians and Russians were at odds in the Balkans. Austria wanted to keep the Russians out while the Russians were trying to find a way in. Great Britain was also concerned about Russia's growing influence. The British wanted to prop up the Ottoman Empire and block Russian advances in the Balkans. We can see this in the 1878 Congress of Berlin. It all began when Christian peasants in the Balkans revolted against the Ottoman Empire in 1875. Russia announced its support of the Christian peasants and declared war on the Ottoman Empire. The war ended in 1877 with Russia victorious. The Ottomans then signed the Treaty of San Stefano, severely weakening their influence in the Balkans while strengthening Russian influence in the region. However, the Austria-Hungary Kingdom and Great Britain disagreed with this treaty. The Austrians were concerned it would increase Slavic nationalism, and the British were concerned Russia would become too strong in the Balkans. Britain, Austria, and France called for a meeting of the European powers in Berlin in the summer of 1878. This meeting was called the Congress of Berlin, not to be confused with the Berlin Conference, which led to the European partitioning of Africa. The primary goal of the Congress of Berlin was to preserve the balance of power among the European nations while maintaining some measure of peace. The Congress of Berlin led to the Treaty of Berlin. The Treaty of Berlin revised the Treaty of San Stefano to lessen Russian gains and weaken Ottoman power in the Balkans. The treaty included several terms, including Montenegro, Serbia, and Romania's complete independence from the Ottoman Empire. These nations had been autonomous states for many years, but were still nominally part of the Ottoman Empire. For our purposes, the most critical part of the Treaty of Berlin was the Ottoman Empire ceding control of Bosnia to the Austria-Hungary Kingdom. The treaty gave Austria the right to occupy and administer Bosnia, though the Ottoman Sultan would continue to hold formal sovereign rights until 1908. In other words, Austria controlled Bosnia, but the Ottoman Empire could pretend it was still in charge. This victory was a windfall for Austria. The Habsburg dynasty, which controlled the dual kingdom of Austria-Hungary, had a weak navy which prevented them from expanding overseas like France, Germany, and Great Britain. Austria-Hungary could only expand through the Balkans, and acquiring Bosnia gave them that opportunity. Not only would it provide them with a chance to influence newly independent Serbia, but they could also exploit Bosnia's natural resources. Bosnian Resistance. Just before the occupation began, social unrest paralyzed Bosnia as the Bosniaks resisted domination by the Christian Habsburg monarchy. The Austrian government in Vienna issued an imperial proclamation promising equal protection to Bosnian Muslims under Habsburg law. Despite these overtures, the unrest grew into a resistance movement. The Ottoman government instigated this resistance by leaving 40,000 armed troops in Bosnia and providing weapons and ammunition. The Bosnian resistance movement was formidable but disorganized, and by the end of 1878, the worst of the fighting was over. Another dust-up occurred in 1881 when the Austrian government passed a law requiring military service from the entire population of Bosnia. Bosnian Serbs, who were primarily Orthodox, and Bosnian Muslims were opposed to the conscription law. However, Bosnian Croats were Catholic, like the Habsburg dynasty, and they approved of this law. Here, we can see the seeds of the alignments that would come into play in the 1990s. Bosnian Muslim affairs in Austria-Hungary. Like everyone else in the Ottoman Empire, the Bosniaks' primary identity was their religion, Islam. But after the Treaty of Berlin, for the first time, Bosnian Muslims were under the jurisdiction of non-Muslims and separated from other Muslims in the Ottoman Empire. In 1879, Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire negotiated the Novi Pazar Convention, which laid out Bosnia and Herzegovina's legal status and confirmed sovereignty and the Sultan's rights as head of the Muslim community. Bosnian Muslims retained the right to contact Muslims in the Ottoman Empire and to practice their customs and traditions. They were even allowed to use Ottoman currency in Bosnia. Generally speaking, the Austrian government allowed considerable religious freedom in Bosnia. The Islamic community of Bosnia and Herzegovina. In 1882, the Ottoman Sheikhul Islam appointed a Bosnian mufti named Hilmi Efendi Omarovic. The Austrian government called him Ra'isul Ulam, meaning head of the scholars. Mufti Hilmi now had the authority to appoint Muslim judges in Bosnia, eventually leading to the Islamic Community of Bosnia and Herzegovina, or ICBH. ICBH would become the most important and influential Islamic organization in Bosnia. However, things changed after World War I. After Austria lost the war, Bosnia became part of a new nation called the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. A Serbian dynasty ruled this kingdom and abolished the religious freedom Bosnians had enjoyed under the Austrians. The Serbian government then moved ICBH headquarters from Sarajevo to Belgrade, Serbia, to better monitor its activities. Things got even worse after World War II, as much of the Balkans fell under communist rule. The communist Yugoslav government seized ICBH property and shut down Islamic schools in Bosnia. By the 1980s, Bosniaks had lived for decades under communist rule and were much less religious. Being Muslim was more of a cultural identity than a religious one. Today, however, the ICBH plays a critical role in revitalizing Islam in Bosnia and reconnecting Bosniaks with their Islamic heritage.